The sun was high over the small, dusty town of Calico as the market buzzed with activity. Merchants shouted their wares, horses neighed from the stables, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with the earthiness of hay and livestock. People milled about, going about their business, but one figure stood out from the rest. A man, dressed in worn leather and a wide-brimmed hat, stepped into the market with the steady pace of someone used to being noticed. His boots hit the ground with a thud, and the crowd parted without a word. They all knew who he was, Harlan Boone, the rancher with a reputation as big as his frame. He wasn't looking for company. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was just looking for a horse. The air was thick with the hum of everyday life. But Harlan wasn't interested in any of it. Not the produce, not the fancy horses on display, not even the shiny new wagon that a local merchant was trying to sell. He was there for one thing and one thing only: a solid, reliable workhorse to help with his ranch. His eyes scanned the stalls, but nothing seemed right. Too young, too old, too slow. He paused at a corner where the crowd seemed thinner, his gaze catching a figure that was far out of place in this sea of activity. At first, he thought she was just another vendor, but as he stepped closer, the woman's stillness stood out even more. Her back was straight, her hands resting on a small wooden crate, and her face turned toward the bustle around her. But her eyes didn't follow. She was blind, he realized, her pupils lost in the cloudy white of sightless eyes. Her presence was almost otherworldly, like a calm in the middle of chaos. And for a moment, Harlan forgot why he was even there. The girl, no more than 20, stood there in tattered clothes that clung to her thin frame, the sleeves rolled up at the elbows and the hem of her dress covered in dust. Her feet were bare, her face pale except for the faintest hint of a bruise along her jawline. Harlan watched her for a second longer, noticing how she tilted her head slightly as if listening to the sound around her. Her posture was one of quiet strength, but there was something else too, a kind of sadness that seemed to hang around her like a shadow. He shook his head. It wasn't his business. He came for a horse, not to get tangled up in someone else's mess. But something about her stillness, the way the crowd ignored her as though she were nothing, gnawed at him. Most people would have avoided someone like her. Most people wouldn't even have noticed her. But Harlan couldn't stop looking. He took a step toward her, his boots heavy on the ground. As he did, the woman turned her head, as though sensing him approach. Her head cocked slightly, and for a split second, their eyes met, or rather, his gaze landed somewhere on her face. She blinked slowly, but there was no recognition, no curiosity, just a quiet, steady gaze as if she had long ago stopped expecting anything from the world. It made his chest tighten. He cleared his throat, his deep voice booming out as he spoke, though he hadn't planned on talking to anyone. "You lost, girl." His words were blunt, practical. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were debating whether to answer. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd expected, fragile almost. "I'm not lost. Just waiting." Waiting for what? His curiosity won out, though he didn't know why he cared. "For someone to take me," she said, her words almost a whisper. She didn't seem ashamed, just matter of fact, like she had said the same thing 100 times before. Harlan felt a jolt in his gut, something unfamiliar and unwelcomed. There was something in her voice, something too honest, too raw. "And if no one takes you?" he asked before he could stop himself. "I'll stay," she replied simply, as if that was the only option. "I don't mind." Her calmness made him uncomfortable. No one should be so resigned, not at her age. There was a heaviness to her words, an acceptance that went beyond anything he'd ever seen. He didn't like it. He shifted on his feet, adjusting his hat, trying to brush away the feeling settling in his chest. "You're not from around here, are you?" She shook her head slowly, a small sound escaping her lips. "No, sir. I'm just passing through. I've been here a while, though." The quiet between them stretched, and Harlan's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. He had come to the market with a single purpose: to find a horse. But there was something about this girl, this woman, that tugged at him. She had no place in this world of hustle and bustle, no clear direction. She was just there, and that was when he made the decision. "I could use help," he said, more to himself than to her. His voice was steady, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I've got land. It's tough work. You ever worked with animals?" The woman's head tilted slightly, her expression unreadable. "I've never worked with horses," she replied, "but I know how to listen." Something in that answer made him pause. She couldn't see, but maybe she could hear better than most. Maybe that was the kind of help he needed more than anything. It didn't make sense, but it was the only thing that felt right in that moment. "I'll take you with me," he said, not entirely sure what he was offering, but knowing he had already made up his mind. She didn't hesitate. For a brief second, her lips parted in surprise. Then her face softened, as if understanding something deeper than words could say. "Thank you," she whispered. Harlan didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he was just tired of the loneliness. Maybe he needed someone, anyone, to help with the work. But as he turned away from the market, he had a strange feeling that this was more than just about horses. Something about this woman, this quiet, blind girl, felt like the beginning of a story he hadn't expected to be a part of. As they walked out of the market together, Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. But somehow, he couldn't bring himself to care. And for Dina, it was the beginning of something entirely new, though she didn't know it yet. The road to Harlan's ranch stretched long and quiet, the wind sweeping through the open plains like a whisper. Dina sat on the wagon, her back straight and hands resting on her lap. The gentle sway of the wagon over the dirt path was almost soothing, but her mind buzzed with 1,000 questions. She had left the market without a second glance, stepping into a world she had never known, following a man she barely understood. But there was something in his presence, something quiet and strong, that made her feel like she could trust him, even though she knew better than to trust anyone. Harlan drove the team of horses with a steady hand, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He didn't speak much. His silence was comforting in its own way. It wasn't uncomfortable, just a man alone with his thoughts, as if words weren't always necessary. Dina felt no need to fill the silence. She had spent most of her life in silence, learning to listen in a way few others could. The rustle of the wind, the distant calls of birds, the soft clop of the horses' hooves. These sounds formed a language all their own. The land around them was vast, open, and empty. Dina had never seen it, of course, but she could imagine it in her mind. Endless fields that stretched out under the sun, hills that rose in the distance like shadows waiting to be touched. She could feel the warmth of the sun on her face, the dust that stirred in the air, and the gentle rock of the wagon beneath her. She had lived in towns before, places with noise and people, but this wide, open land felt different. It was like a place where you could breathe without being crowded. "You'll get used to the ride," Harlan said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low and steady, with a hint of something beneath it, something kind but hard to place. Dina turned her head slightly, trying to focus on his voice. "I'm used to quiet," she said softly, the words more for herself than for him. "But this is different. It's peaceful out here," Harlan agreed, his gaze still ahead. "Not many folks come this far out. Too much space for most people. But it's home for me." She could hear the faint edge of something in his tone. She wasn't sure what it was, regret, maybe, or just a simple truth. His words hung in the air, settling between them. Dina wanted to ask more, to learn about him, but she had learned long ago that people who were used to being alone didn't always want to talk about why. So she stayed quiet, letting the conversation drift away like the wind. They traveled for hours, the sun starting to dip low in the sky. The vast land slowly gave way to rolling hills, dotted with patches of wildflowers and tall grasses. Dina could hear the faint sound of the creek in the distance, the rush of water cutting through the earth. The smell of pine filled the air, mixing with the scent of fresh earth and damp leaves. She could almost feel the peace of the place seeping into her bones, like something she had been missing without knowing it. "We'll be there soon," Harlan said, glancing over at her for the first time in what felt like hours. "Don't worry, it's a good place to start fresh." Dina nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what starting fresh meant. What did it mean to leave behind everything you had ever known and walk into something so completely unknown? She had been running for so long, never staying in one place for too long, never getting too comfortable. But this felt different. There was something about Harlan, something steady and reliable, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could stay here. As they approached the ranch, the land seemed to change. The hills gave way to small, rocky outcroppings, and the trees thickened, casting long shadows over the path. Dina could hear the sound of animals in the distance, cows lowing, chickens clucking, and something else. Something larger, maybe a horse or a mule. The place felt alive, but in a quiet way, the kind of life that moved at its own pace, unhurried and unaffected by the rush of the world beyond. Harlan slowed the wagon as they neared the ranch house, a simple structure built of wood and stone, with a small porch out front. Dina could hear the faint clinking of metal, the scraping of a shovel against stone, and the sound of someone moving inside. It was small, but it was hers, Harlan's home. It felt like a place that had been built to last, with strong foundations and solid walls. There was a sense of permanence to it that Dina hadn't felt in years. Harlan stopped the wagon and hopped down, his boots thudding against the dirt. "Here we are," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were shadowed beneath his hat, but there was a warmth in them, something that made her feel like she wasn't just a stranger here. Dina hesitated for a moment, then climbed down from the wagon, her feet landing softly on the ground. She didn't know what she expected, but as she stood there, the cool evening air brushing against her skin, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. "It's not much," Harlan said, his voice quieter now, as if he were unsure whether he should offer more. "But it'll do, and it's yours if you want it." Dina took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the words sink into her chest. There was no judgment in his tone, no pity, just an offer, plain and simple. It was a lot to take in. She had never had a place that was hers, not truly. She had always been a guest, a burden, a stray. But here, in this quiet, open place, there was a chance to be something more. "I don't need much," Dina replied, her voice soft but steady. "Just a place to rest, and maybe a little peace." Harlan nodded, turning back toward the house. "You'll find it here," he said quietly. "It's all I can promise." Dina followed him up the small path to the porch, the door creaking open in front of them. She stepped inside, the scent of wood and earth wrapping around her. The space was simple, just a few rooms and a small hearth in the center. But it felt solid, real. As she stood in the doorway, she realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, wondering when she'd have to leave. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could stay. And that thought was enough to make her heart swell with a quiet hope she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. The next few days at the ranch were a blur of new experiences and quiet moments. Dina spent her time getting accustomed to the rhythms of the land, things she had never known, like the creaking of the barn door, the smell of freshly tilled earth, and the sounds of animals stirring at dawn. The ranch was quieter than the town she had lived in, but it wasn't the stillness she had feared. Here, the quiet felt alive. It was a steady, comforting hum, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Dina had never worked with animals before, but she quickly found that the ranch wasn't asking for much from her. It wasn't hard work, at least not the kind she had imagined. Harlan gave her simple tasks, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, and keeping the small garden near the house clear of weeds. Every morning, she would walk barefoot across the dirt yard, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin and the roughness of the ground beneath her. Her feet were sore from a constant walking, but it was a soreness she didn't mind. Harlan rarely spoke during these chores, but she didn't need him to. He showed her how to feed the animals, how to spot the freshest eggs, and how to tell when the crops were ready to be harvested. There's a quiet strength to him, one that didn't need to be loud or demanding. And for the first time in years, Dina found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, she could learn how to live here. One afternoon, as she was tending to the garden, Harlan approached, holding a basket of fresh vegetables from the small patch they had grown near the back of the house. She paused, wiping the sweat from her brow, and looked up at him. "I can take that," she said, holding out her hands instinctively, knowing it would be the polite thing to do. Harlan handed it over without a word, his rough hands brushing against hers for a brief moment. It was a small thing, but Dina noticed it. She noticed how his touch was gentle despite the calluses on his hands, how his eyes always seemed to focus on what was needed without a single word being exchanged. He wasn't the kind of man to shower someone with praise or attention. He was steady, silent, and in his silence, Dina began to feel something different. Over the next few days, she became more confident in her tasks. She learned the names of the animals, the cows, the sheep, the horse that Harlan kept for riding. She even started to help with the small chores around the house, scrubbing the floors and washing the dishes. Every night, after the sun set and the work was done, she would sit by the fire in the small living room, watching the flames dance in the hearth. There was something peaceful about it, something that made her feel like she belonged here. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when Dina's mind wandered, when the quiet of the ranch seemed to press in on her, and the weight of her past became too much to bear. She would find herself staring out at the hills, the weight of the life she had left behind dragging at her like a chain. One evening, after dinner, Harlan sat down beside her on the porch, staring out at the fading light of the sky. Dina was aware of the silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the space they occupied together. Two people who had no need for words, but still shared something in the stillness of the night. "You miss your family?" Harlan asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Dina flinched at the question, her heart tightening. She hadn't expected him to ask. She hadn't expected anyone to ask. "I don't remember much about them," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just know they weren't there when I needed them." Harlan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I get it. Family's a strange thing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't awkward, though. It was just understanding. Harlan had lost someone, too. Maybe that was what made him so quiet, so careful with the words he chose. The next morning, Dina was out in the garden again, her hands deep in the dirt as she worked. She heard Harlan's footsteps approach, and when she turned, she saw him holding something in his hands. "Thought you might want to try this," he said, handing her a small, worn hoe. "Not much, but it'll help with the weeds." Dina took it with a small smile, feeling the weight of the tool in her hands. It wasn't much, but it was something to show that she wasn't just here to take up space. She had a purpose now, even if it was just tending to the garden. Later that afternoon, as she worked in the yard, Dina noticed something she hadn't before. The way the sun fell across the ranch, the way the trees swayed gently in the breeze, the way the animals moved through their daily routines. It was all so simple, so steady. And in that simplicity, Dina found something she hadn't had in a long time: peace. The peace wasn't something she had expected to find here, in this new place with a giant rancher she barely knew. But it was there, woven into the everyday things: the smell of the soil, the taste of fresh bread, the quiet companionship of a man who said little but understood so much. As the days turned into weeks, Dina began to feel the weight of her past start to lift little by little. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was quieter now, as if the noise of her past had been drowned out by the steady rhythm of the ranch. She was no longer the blind girl in the market, left alone and forgotten. She was someone now, someone with a purpose, someone with a place. And as the sun set behind the hills that evening, Dina felt something inside her stir. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the ranch as Dina worked in the garden. It had become part of her routine now, waking early, tending to the animals, and working the land. There was a peaceful rhythm to it all, a kind of calm that Dina had never known before. It felt like she was building a life, piece by piece, one small task at a time. But even in the calmest of moments, her past had a way of creeping in. It wasn't long before Harlan mentioned a trip into town. He had to pick up supplies, and he had been going alone for weeks. Dina had never asked much about the town, but today, for some reason, she found herself thinking about it. It had been years since she had seen a real town. The noise, the crowds, the stares, she could feel them already. The memories of the way people had looked at her, the whispers behind her back, the judgments. They all came rushing back. "I'll go with you," Dina said quietly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the wind. Harlan turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. "You sure? It's a small town, and people don't take kindly to strangers. Least of all ones that." He paused, his words hanging in the air. Dina knew what he was getting at. She wasn't blind to how people looked at her. She had felt the weight of their gazes since the moment she arrived. She was different. She knew that. And the last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself. But she had lived in fear for so long, hiding from the world and from the shame that clung to her like a second skin. She didn't want to hide anymore. If she was going to make a life here, she had to face it, whatever it was. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to see it to be part of it." Harlan studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words, then gave a nod. "All right, but stay close." The town was small, nothing more than a collection of wooden buildings huddled together on a single dirt road. As they approached, Dina could hear the distant hum of voices, the clinking of metal, and the low murmur of conversations. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And as they entered, Dina immediately felt the eyes on her. The streets were narrow, lined with dusty old buildings and a few weathered storefronts. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop. The place felt like something out of time, as if it had been forgotten by the world beyond the hills. But what really made Dina uncomfortable were the people. The men who eyed her with curiosity, the women who whispered behind their hands. It didn't take long for her to realize they were all talking about her. She kept her head low, her hands clenched at her sides, walking just a step behind Harlan. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the feeling that they were all staring at her, judging her, labeling her. She had seen that look before, the one that made her feel like she didn't belong, like she was a burden to everyone around her. Harlan walked ahead, his broad shoulders blocking her from most of the stares, but even he couldn't shield her from the murmurs. As they passed the blacksmith shop, she caught the tail end of a conversation. "Did you hear? Boone's got himself a new girl. Wonder where she came from. Guess she ain't from around here." The words stung, even though she knew they weren't meant for her ears. She had heard whispers like this her whole life, always about her being someone who didn't belong. It had always been easier to hide, to keep moving, to stay just out of reach of the judgment. But this time, she couldn't run. This time, she had to stand still and face it. They made their way to the general store, and Dina could feel the tension in the air. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, but the place seemed quieter, the people more watchful. She stayed close to Harlan as he spoke with the storekeeper, but she could feel eyes on her, curious, suspicious eyes. They looked her up and down, as though she were some strange creature they had never seen before. When Harlan finished his business, he turned to her. "You ready to go?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd as if expecting trouble. Dina nodded, but her throat felt tight. She had been expecting it, but that didn't make it any easier. As they stepped out of the store, she was aware of the looks that followed them. She could hear the soft murmur of voices, the snickers, the whispered comments. Looks like Boone's got a real project this time. Bet he's paying her. He's always been soft on the girls. I hear she's trouble. The words hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other. She wasn't going to let them see her break. Not here. Not now. Harlan didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, and though the whispers and stares hurt, she found herself drawing strength from the way he didn't care. He wasn't ashamed of her. He didn't see her as a project or a burden. He saw her as something else entirely. As they walked back toward the wagon, Dina felt a wave of relief wash over her. But it wasn't the kind of relief she had expected. It wasn't a sense of victory over the people who had judged her, but rather a quiet acceptance. The town was what it was. She couldn't change their minds, but she could change hers. Harlan loaded the supplies into the wagon, his movements steady and sure, while Dina climbed up beside him. The trip back to the ranch was quiet, but this time, Dina didn't feel the weight of the town's judgment pressing in on her. She had expected it, yes, but she had survived it. And that was enough for now. When they arrived back at the ranch, Harlan didn't say anything. He simply turned to her and nodded, as if acknowledging the silent battle she had fought. Dina gave him a small, appreciative smile. For the first time in a long time, Dina felt like she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the world. She was standing in it, facing whatever came her way, and no one could take that away from her. The days following their trip to town were calm, but Dina couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. It wasn't just the gossip from the townspeople. No, there was something deeper, something in the land itself. Harlan had been distant lately, caught up in something she couldn't quite place. He worked longer hours, his brow furrowed in thought, and the moments of quiet camaraderie they had shared seemed to fade into the background. One afternoon, just as the sun began to dip low in the sky, a man rode up to the ranch on horseback. The horse's hooves kicked up dust as it approached, and the man looked familiar in a way that sent a chill down Dina's spine. She was in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed, when she heard the sound of the horses galloping. Harlan, who had been fixing the fence, straightened up and watched as the stranger drew closer. His face hardened. Dina couldn't see the man, but she could hear the tension in Harlan's voice as he greeted him. "What brings you here?" Harlan's words were clipped, cautious, like someone who knew this wasn't just a social call. "I'm looking for someone," the man said, his voice gruff. "A girl. Dina Wexler." Dina's heart skipped a beat. The name, the way he said it, it sent a rush of memories flooding back. The feeling of being unwanted, of being tossed aside. The memories weren't clear, not all of them, but she remembered enough. The man's voice, though not familiar, brought a wave of dread. She froze in place, her hands stilling on the flowers she had been tending to. "You're a long way from where you came from," Harlan said, his voice growing colder. "What's this about?" The man dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "I'm just here to collect her," he said, his tone casual, almost too casual. "She's got debts. Her father owed my family, and I'm here to make sure that debt gets paid." Dina felt a cold lump form in her throat. Her father. She hadn't spoken about him much, not to Harlan, not to anyone. But hearing this man mention him like that, like she was a piece of property, an object to be collected, it stung. Her past had been filled with ghosts she thought she had outrun, but now they were catching up to her. "I'm not going anywhere," Dina said, her voice shaking. She didn't care that she was blind or that she had no idea who this man was. She wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. Harlan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "She stays here. You got no claim on her." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Dina could almost feel the anger in the air. He was sizing Harlan up, as if trying to determine if he was serious. "You don't know what you're getting into, Boone," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "This girl's been nothing but trouble for her family. And now she's your problem." "I said, she stays," Harlan repeated, his voice firm. Dina felt the weight of the moment, the gravity of it pressing down on her chest. She had no idea what this man wanted or why he had come all the way out here, but it didn't matter. Harlan had made his decision. He was standing by her. And for the first time in a long time, Dina felt like she wasn't alone in the world. The man didn't push it further. Instead, he just gave a cold laugh. "You'll regret this, Boone. People like you always do." With that, the man turned and mounted his horse again, kicking up more dust as he rode away. The tension that had filled the air slowly dissipated, but Dina's heart was still racing. She was shaken, but she was more determined than ever not to go back to that life. Harlan didn't say anything right away. He simply stood there, watching the man disappear over the horizon. After a long moment, he turned back to Dina, his face still hard, but something softer in his eyes. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice calm, reassuring. Dina nodded, but she couldn't shake the unease that lingered. Whoever that man was, whoever was after her, it wasn't over. She could feel in her bones. The past wasn't just something she could leave behind. It had a way of coming back, finding you, no matter how far you ran. That night, as they sat by the fire, Dina's thoughts raced. She couldn't help but wonder who else was out there, waiting to claim her, to take her back. She had thought she had escaped, thought she had found a place where she could breathe, where she could finally belong. But the world outside the ranch was a different kind of beast, and it wasn't done with her yet. Harlan didn't say much as they ate their meal in silence, but Dina could feel his presence beside her, solid and unwavering. He wasn't going to let anyone take her from him, not without a fight. The next morning, the man's words echoed in Dina's mind. "You'll regret this." They were a warning, a threat. But Harlan wasn't backing down. He had chosen his side, and for the first time in years, Dina wasn't alone in the fight. As they went about their chores that morning, Dina couldn't help but notice the weight that had settled over the ranch. It wasn't just the presence of danger. It was the uncertainty of what was to come. The peace she had found here was fragile, and the world outside wasn't going to let her keep it without a fight. But Dina wasn't going anywhere. She had found something here, something real, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to fight back. The days that followed were filled with tension, but as time wore on, Dina felt herself growing stronger. The memory of the stranger's visit still haunted her, but there was something about the ranch, something about Harlan, that kept her grounded. She wasn't just a lost soul anymore. She wasn't running. She was part of something now, and that made all the difference. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the fields as Dina stepped outside. The air was cool, the earth damp beneath her bare feet as she made her way to the barn. She had gotten used to the routine, and though there was still a quiet anxiety that lingered in her chest, she knew she had a place here. She wasn't just Harlan Boone's responsibility. She was his equal, his partner, and the thought made her smile as she grabbed a rake to clear the hay from the barn floor. Harlan was already out in the field, working with the cattle. His presence was steady, like the land itself, and watching him always brought a sense of calm to Dina. He didn't need to say much to make her feel safe. His actions spoke louder than words ever could. Today, she had a feeling it was going to be different. There was an energy about the place that seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. It wasn't just the steady work of the ranch. It was the unspoken understanding between them. Harlan had never asked her to leave, never told her she didn't belong. And in return, Dina had given him the one thing she hadn't offered anyone in years: trust. By mid-afternoon, Dina had finished her tasks, and she wandered toward the porch to take a break. The sun was beginning to set, and the air had warmed up. She sat on the wooden steps, looking out over the fields. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt a deep sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from running away from something. It was the kind that came from standing still, from choosing to be somewhere, to be with someone. Harlan came back to the house just as the sun dipped low in the sky. He wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced over at Dina. His expression was softer than usual, And for a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't there before. "You done for the day?" he asked, his voice steady but with a hint of warmth. "Yeah," Dina replied, her voice calm but filled with a quiet contentment. "I think so." Harlan stood beside her for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. The silence between them was comfortable now. There was no tension, no need to fill the space with words. It wasn't uncomfortable, just familiar. "You know," Harlan said after a beat, "I never thought I'd find myself in this position." He paused, as if weighing his words. "But I'm glad I did." Dina turned toward him, her brow furrowing slightly in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Harlan began, his voice lower now, "that when I took you in, I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. But now," he shook his head, as if lost in thought. "Now, I can't imagine it any other way. You made this place feel like it's home again." Dina felt a warmth bloom in her chest, but she didn't know what to say. His words hit her harder than she expected. She had never really thought of herself as someone who could bring something to the table, let alone make a place feel like home. But here in this quiet, steady world, she had done just that. "I think we've both made this place something more," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Harlan didn't respond right away, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward in what could only be described as a smile. It wasn't much, just a small lift of his lips, but it was enough. Dina felt something stir inside her, something warm, something that had been buried for a long time. That evening, as the sky turned deep shades of orange and purple, Harlan and Dina sat together by the fire. The crackling of the wood filled the silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that told stories without needing to speak. Harlan handed Dina a bowl of stew, and she accepted it with a smile, grateful for the simple act of kindness. They ate in silence, the soft light of the fire flickering between them. It was one of those moments where the weight of the world outside didn't seem to matter anymore. For the first time, Dina didn't feel the need to run. She didn't feel like she had to prove anything to anyone. She was here, and that was enough. After dinner, they walked outside together, the cool night air brushing against their skin. The stars were bright above them, scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Dina couldn't see them, but she could feel their presence, the vastness of the universe stretching out before them. "You know," Harlan said quietly as they stood side by side, looking out into the night, "I never really thought about what came after." Dina turned her head slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Harlan began, "I didn't think much about a future. I was just living. But now, with you here, I feel like maybe there's something more. Something worth fighting for." Dina's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say, but her hand reached out toward him, her fingers brushing against his. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like everything. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice steady and sure. And for the first time, Dina believed it. The next morning, as Dina went about her usual chores, she felt a quiet strength within herself. The weight of her past was still there, but it no longer had the power to define her. She had found a place, a home, where she wasn't just surviving. She was living, and that made all the difference. Harlan was there, too, helping with the work, his presence constant and unwavering. The ranch, once a place of solitude, now felt like a shared space, a place where two people, two souls, could heal and grow. As they worked together, side by side, Dina realized something she hadn't known before. Sometimes the future doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it comes piece by piece, day by day, in the quiet moments shared between two people who understand each other in a way that no one else does. And as the sun set on another peaceful day, Dina felt a new kind of hope settle in her chest. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in her life, she knew it would be something worth living for.